Expanding Mind with Eric Davis, Thursdays at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Eric Davis. Today we'll open another chapter in the great tome of the cultures of consciousness. And since we're getting near the Halloween time of year, or actually we're at the Halloween time of year, which always brings out the pagan in me. And I was thinking about pagan gatherings. And the funny thing about pagan gatherings, if you go to a neo-pagan gathering outside, you got the fire going, and there's, the moon's in the air, and there's drumming, and these sort of, wild bodies and exotic scents, and, it's really easy to kind of transport yourself back into a more kind of archaic headspace. But a very different thing happens when the pagan gathering is occurring, say, at a kind of low-rent hotel in San Jose, which is where Pantheon takes place every year and has for many years. And the funny thing when you go to a pagan gathering inside of a junky hotel in the kind of conference rooms, and it's all these people walking around in garb, and then there's like the muggles are there, selling them coffee and bad sandwiches and stuff. You realize it's just as much about the truth of pagan religion today, because it's really pretty much like a science fiction fantasy convention. And in fact, a place called Pantheon, the fact they call it Pantheon is clearly tipping their hat to this other side of the pagan imagination, which has to do more with, weird science, pop culture, the technological imagination, the attempt to create meaningful social connections at the sort of weird edge of, consumer America. And one of the best weird science moments I've had at Pantheon, which can be quite a fun time, was in both in 2009 and 2010. I saw presentations of a certain radionic device known as a Hieronymus machine. In 2009, it was billed as a machine magic ritual, and it was held in the suite hosted by the Open Source Order of the Golden Dawn, and it involved this curious device that looked kind of like some mid-century electromagnetic radio transmitter thing that was dealing with these etheric energies, which we will talk about more today with our guest, Joe Max. And then we all linked hands, and we had this circuit of this peculiar energy, ode, chi, what have you, circulating through the room. And it was a very wonderful experience, but it really struck home for me as well, that really key link between the pagan imagination and let's say the imaginative properties of machines. And so I'm very happy that we have one of the head honchos of this ritual with us today, Joe Max, who I'll be bringing on in just a second. Before that, of course, our co-host, Magick, calling in from Los Angeles. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Eric. How are you?
Pretty good. Hey, so do you still like to be called the White Witch of Los Angeles, or is that a bit much?
No, it's totally my deal.
You like it?
I do.
Would you like it if I said that every week?
Say it as much as you can, please.
We'll get that brand recognition down there. Have you ever played with the Radionics device?
In fact, I have. There's a few different ones I've looked at, and I've met a couple of the people that were students of some of the progenitors. There was a lot of the Radionics technology, as it's called, Radionics, came from this woman named Ruth Drown in Los Angeles, who studied with this fellow named Oscar Brunler, and they were active and came to the PRS and kind of, had talked to Manly P. Hall, and there was a couple of their students, this one older woman who I'm not sure if she's still alive, her name was Priscilla Dewey, practiced using them, and I got to meet her and speak with her about Ruth and Oscar, so I got really into them for a little while.
Well, it's wonderful. It's funny how much of California the story this is, and indeed, Senor Max, you too are Californians. Am I not correct?
Yes, I am. I'm calling from Oakland, where we're trying to dodge the tear gas and the earthquakes.
How is the tear gas going there, by the way?
Well, it's kind of wafted away now, so it's not as bad as it was a couple of nights ago.
Excellent. Well, good to hear. Good to hear you're still in hale and hearty. So let's start out with the Hieronymus machine, which of course has the best name. Like, you already win just with the phrase Hieronymus machine.
I know, the guy that invented it, his name is Dr. T. Galen Hieronymus, and how much cooler of a name can you get?
Wow.
And I know that you did that ritual I described with John Michael Greer, who's somebody else who's a writer on occult topics and very interesting blogger, and someone who's also interested in these devices. So maybe just telling us a little bit about what radionics is and what the Hieronymus machine is a good way to, kind of get into the conversation.
Well, let's see. I was asked once to come up with the description of a definition of radionics in 25 words or less. So here's my shot at it. Radionics is the metaphysical art and science of using physical instruments and symbols to model, generate, project, amplify, store, and manipulate subtle energies.
Very good. Very good. So there's a lot going on in that definition, not surprisingly, because from the outside, if you see a radionics device, and if you hear a lot of people try to describe radionics devices, they'll say, well, it's like a way of, controlling, reading, manipulating energy. And you're like, energy? What does that mean? Is it physical? Is it material? Is it electromagnetic? Is it in my mind? And so it sounds like you're saying that these physical devices have this curious relationship with these more etheric qualities.
Yes, I mean, I don't even like to use the term energy because it's confusing. It's because it's not electromagnetism that we're dealing with.
Right.
We've tended to use the term now subtle energies. For lack of any better term, when you're dealing with esoteric effects, you always tend to use the whatever the dominant paradigm of the culture is to explain it.
Right.
So in the past it was gods, it was spirits, it was and then gods became God. And whenever anything that was unexplainable happened, it was easy to explain. God did it.
Right.
But then when when things like magnetism were scientifically described, people started using those terminologies. So you had mesmer and animal magnetism. When energies started to become more, be described as wave functions and particle physics, people started to use waves and vibrations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And now we've reached the point where almost everything is a quantum now.
Yep.
It's kind of this catch-all phrase because it's hard to describe something when you don't actually have the nomenclature to do it. I tend to try. I've come up with more of a really what's being transferred, what's being dealt with here is information. It's not energy in the sense of electromagnetism.
Right.
So it's so I've coined a phrase: etheric information transceivance.
Well, that's one of the things that's so good. A lot of people might think, well, what does that mean? But I know that you have studied some chaos magic, and that's one of the things that always attracted me to chaos magic was that idea of programming and information on an energetic level. And a lot of people don't kind of remember, or if they do, they don't really care, that DNA is like an informational storage system that works in a very kind of energetic way to transmit and receive this kind of stuff. So I always like to describe it in terms of DNA when people ask about, gathering and storing information on an etheric level. I always say, well, what do you think DNA does?
Exactly. That's a very good description. It's very very good analogy for it. And
well,
we
don't have a Hieronymus machine obviously on the air right now. Maybe you could describe a little bit what they look like, and of course I want to mention that you make these devices and you do them very beautifully, and they're very interestingly designed, and we can talk about some of those design things maybe later on. But just to even give us a sense about the basic idea of how these devices work and what they're supposed to do.
Well, the idea, the original machines, and it's amazing, Maha, that you actually knew some of Ruth Drown's students.
Yeah.
Because she was one of the early pioneers, and also one of the people who was, like Wilhelm Reich, was persecuted.
She was. She went to jail. Yeah.
They actually put people in jail for this.
Yeah.
Right.
So. Originally the idea was that there was, they didn't know back then what was happening. And at the turn of the century, electricity was the big thing, and radio waves had been discovered. So they tended to describe these things in terms of, again, the dominant paradigm of the age. So that's what got Ruth Drown in trouble, because she was relating what she was doing to radio waves.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, the entire name of it. Unfortunately, just the describing it in those terms, because she didn't know any better, and no one did. But describing it in those terms, that's how she got into trouble. Because these devices look like radio machines. And the way you use them is described as tuning. So typically a person, animal, soil sample, plant, whatever that you wish to analyze the etheric energy state of is connected to the machine in some way, either directly or by using a sample. It can be, and this is like, generally, it's something like the most common thing is a hair sample, or a leaf sample, or a fur sample. Something that, of course, contains the DNA of the subject in question. But there are radionicists that also use photographs. Typically, and radionics still has a lot of applications, not so much in the United States, but very much in England and Australia and New Zealand for agricultural purposes. So they use, if they want to analyze the energy state of a field, they will take a aerial photograph. And
that idea of taking something from the thing, I know like it gets kind of abstract with photographs and things like that, but I always like to remember that voodoo and like sympathetic magic from shamans, that's how they would do contagious magic, was by, taking a piece of hair or fingernails or something that contained the part of the person, and that's how they would do medicine over distance, like even in ancient times. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how that relates to the radionic machine?
Well, I think it is a direct relationship. I think that we're probably observing the same phenomena, what they used to call sympathetic magic. And, a case could be made that is what the radionics practitioner is doing, is a modernized form of sympathetic magic.
Right.
You can explain it on a energetic level, like when the using of photographs. Generally, amongst, radionicists, digital photography is not used. Analog photography is used. Because in that case, what's actually happening is the photons of light are bouncing off the target, striking the chemical film and causing a chemical reaction in it. So those photons have actually came into contact with the subject, now in contact with the film, and that film, Polaroid photography, is considered the best because you are now have something that has touched through the photon exchange the original subject. When I use photographs in my machine, I use print photography. I mean, I print out prints rather than using Polaroids. Polaroids are kind of hard to come by these days, although they're going through a revival right now. But if you print out a photograph, you tape the negative to the back of it. And so the original negative, which was in photon contact with the subject, is now what you're using as what the radionists call the witness. Although Dr. Hieronymus didn't like that word, and he preferred specimen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, here's a question for you: is that hearing a lot of way you're describing this and the kinds of results that you've had with them. I mean, we're clearly in that realm of alternative medicine where there are energies that are described and phenomena occur that sort of elude conventional science and materialistic accounts of how the body works and how energy works, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the interesting things about the presentations that I've seen you give and the conversations I've had with you is that you come from a pretty sort of scientific, skeptical frame of mind. Like you developed, and you were never someone who was like going to jump on the latest sort of new age account of reality because it was glittery and seemed magical. And so your kind of interest in this stuff and your exploration of it was kind of hard won. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, of how you came to see reality through your work with these machines, through your work with magical practice, that opened you up in a way that you can be more fully explore the potential of this sort of parallel world, if you will, at least from a kind of conventional scientific point of view.
Well, it was very experiential for me because, I know we've talked about this before. I spent quite a few years as a real hardcore scientific materialist skeptic. And so it took my actual experience of coming up against some things that it couldn't otherwise explain. Now, most people who practice any kind of magical work will have a handful of stories of things that they just can't explain. But generally, it's actually very rare. So whenever when I was exposed to these things, there was one particular thing. It was kind of a turning point for me that it was the creation of a goetic talisman, and my ex-wife and I had created it, and I was still right on the edge of my skepticism, and I was kind of doing it more. So I was thinking that this magical stuff, it's probably just a kind of behavioral psychology. It all works like that, and if I can, convince my wife at the time that we are removing a curse from her, then she's going to believe it, and that's what makes it work. So we went through the entire process of creating and charging a goetic talisman on a piece of parchment paper. And when we had finished, and we picked the thing up, and I placed it in her hand, and it started to writhe. I mean, it literally moved. It wrinkled and writhed like it was being exposed to a fire. I'm sitting there watching this happen, and like, I'm seeing something I can't explain. And so, being the skeptic that I was, I said, okay, we're going to confirm this with an experiment. So after we were finished with all this, I cut out another piece of the parchment paper, and we drew some scribbled ink on it that was about the same amount of ink that it took to draw the talisman. Cut it out to exactly the same size from the same sheet. Placed it in her hand. Nothing happened. At that point, I figured there's something else going on here. and I'd like to find out what it is. So you're not going to, if you're of a skeptical turn of mind, you're not going to find out about these things by just trying to sit back in your armchair and analyze them.
Right.
You have to go out and do it. And nobody I know who has done that, who has gone out and gotten, and done the work, everyone has something happen that confirms the reality that there is more than material reality.
Well, that's one of the things that has always struck me about the discrepancy between the scientific critics of any of this stuff is that they don't approach it scientifically, right? In science, you have to actually do the thing and experiment and see if it works. And yet the majority of scientific kind of inquiry into these matters don't even try to do it before they do the critique. And like you said, if you try the thing and experiment with it and see results, then you can formulate an opinion based on a, kind of informed empirical result. But a lot of people that are skeptics of this kind of thing don't even try any of the operations that they're, attempting so vehemently to disprove.
Well, one of the sides of that also is that I think one way of reading the situation is that your mind and your hearts and your imaginations sort of willingness to tacitly accept possibility, to gently enter into a place where something else might happen, or maybe to fully embrace a belief for an hour or 2 hours or that evening, or to ride the emotions and feelings and images of an excellently produced right just from a performance level, that somehow by opening up in that way, that's part of the process that allows these kind of facts of the other world to emerge. And so you have to kind of throw yourself into it on some level, and the minute you really do that beyond a certain point, you've kind of left the at least most conventional way of thinking about how scientists test things because of the subject-object kind of breakdown. So it's a funny game. It's almost like if you're willing to let go, you could have evidence, but at that point, it's not quite going to be the same kind of evidence anymore.
Well, because magic is, the way it works is your own mind and body are the laboratory. And, Of course, that makes it difficult to stand outside of your experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem that skeptical materialists have is that they can't explain the mechanism. And this is very important to them. Dr. Hieronymus did several agricultural experiments where he proved his machines worked, at least to the, one of them was an experiment or a process that he did for the 3M Corporation. They were trying to find out what was causing some of their tape products to deteriorate inside shipping containers. And they tried everything to figure it out. They could not figure out what was going on. And so Dr. Hieronymus performed an analysis on the interior samples scraped from the interiors of the shipping containers. He found certain, I don't have the information right in front of me, but certain contaminants showed up on his machine. And so he informed the 3M company about it, and they did more exhausting tests and found out he was right. And this was causing a chemical reaction with their the materials they were using for their tape that was causing it to break down. In his biography, there are reprints of the letters that were going back and forth between him and the chief technicians of the 3M Corporation. Another one was a experiment done for the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, where he successfully destroyed an infestation of cornworms. Now, the problem was that even though it worked, the mechanism could not be explained.
Right.
And that is the problem they have, is that, and the success rate for doing something like, using radionics to destroy pests in a field. Well, traditionally they will use pesticides to do this. But pesticides don't always work. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If you've ever tried to use, pesticides just for an infestation of ants in your house, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. There's not a 100% success rate. But that's okay for the materialists because they can explain the mechanism. Now, with radionics, they can't explain the mechanism. So whether or not it was successful isn't the point. They can't explain the mechanism. This bothers them a lot. Although,
it's that thing that Charles Fort called wild facts.
Yes. Yes.
Such a great phrase.
What I find amazing is that, in a lot of, you look into the, modern medicine and the modern pharmacology and a lot of the real cutting edge drugs that they come up with nowadays. If you look at the scientific, the flyer that comes with them that explains all of the mechanisms, or look it up in the physician's desk reference, a great number of these new drugs include the phrase, the mechanism by which this drug works is not understood.
Well, and that's true with anesthesia, too. Did you know they have no clue how it is that anesthesia works? They just know it does.
They don't even know how aspirin works.
Yeah, they have no idea. And this is the interesting thing, too, where I think chaos theory and magic comes into play with something like, say, pesticides, like you brought up. They know it works, they can see the mechanism, but then all of a sudden it'll stop working. And then they don't really know the mechanism for that, and they'll be like, oh no, suddenly we have this, like, super mosquito that is now immune to these pesticides, and the mechanism no longer works on it, and we can't figure it out because their flesh is still seemingly made out of the same material, and yet it has stopped working. And that's like the kind of where chaos comes into the situation, where science can't quite accommodate those kind of changes.
Well, the bad thing is they just kind of brush it off. Oh, well, we don't understand how it works. Well, then how do you know that it's effective at all? And they'll tell you, well, we have statistical proof.
Right. We
have done scientific experimental trials, and the results, we get a certain percentage of results. And, of course, in medicine, in pharmacology, to compare it to placebo. And what's amazing is that they've tracked this since the 1980s and found that the placebo effect is becoming stronger.
Yeah, it's becoming stronger, so much so that if Prozac was gone through trials now, it would not pass. Because it was so narrow in the 80s or whenever they did their clinical trials. It was just barely ahead, like a percentage point ahead of the placebo. And because the placebo effect is increasing, if it got the same results, it wouldn't pass.
And that's all that matters to them, is if it's a barest percentage above what they call the placebo effect, then that's considered effective. Now, the problem I've had, I love debating with skeptics, and they'll tell me, well, why don't you go perform a set of, proper experimental procedures and find out if these Hieronymus machines really work? I said I'd be glad to. To subject it to the same kind of trials they subject a drug to is going to take a few $1 million.
Yeah.
Because that's how it works. And the only way they'll accept these statistical experiments, when they can't explain the mechanism, is to throw a few $1 million at the problem and try to come out.
That's the other side of wild facts. They're outside of the farm where productive commodities are created. But this is a great conversation. We got to take a break right now. I'm Erik Davis. You're listening to Expanding Mind with Magick. We're talking with Joe Max, Chaos Mage and Hieronymus Machine Maker, and we'll be right back after this.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. This is Magick. We're here with Erik Davis and Joe Max, and we're talking about weird science stuff and magic stuff coming together. And Joe, I know you had mentioned one of the things that kind of stirred your skepticism into these areas was just experience and kind of seeing things that you didn't understand. Can you maybe talk a little bit, I know that you are kind of famous in chaos magic circles. Can you talk about how chaos magic specifically seemed to fit into your mental framework under those auspices?
Wow, my reputation. Me. Well, I mean, shortly around the same time that I was, my ex-wife and I were experimenting with the, more traditional forms of magic, the Goetia, Enochian, and I was getting what I considered to be interesting results. This was the early 1990s, and I came across some folks it was on one of the old original pre-internet bulletin board systems. Before there was the internet, there were BBSs, and I'd come across some people who mentioned the term chaos magic, and the first thing I thought was, chaos magic, invocation by Mandelbrot fractals. What exactly does that mean? And they steered me to the first book by Peter J. Carroll, Liber Null and Psychonaut. And reading that book got me thinking that there's another way to think about this. That by stripping away all of the old antiquated nostalgic way of looking at magic, because that's always been the thing. Magic isn't something new. Magic is something antique, and all we poor moderns can do is hope to somehow capture a glimmer of the glories of the past. If you're going to be, the best thing you could happen to you in magic is to stumble across that old grimoire buried in a vault somewhere in Mesopotamia. And, never read aloud from the grimoire.
Or else you get Evil Dead happening.
Exactly. But and the approach that Carroll and the Illuminates of Thanateros, the IoT, the original, the first group in England that was exploring this new idea, they tried to strip away all of the cultural trappings and get down to the core of the practice itself. What exactly are you doing? What are the steps that you take to cause your brain, your mind, to do these magical things? And that appealed to me, because that it was, here's some people taking a modern approach to this. So I eventually got in touch with these people, and they were originally they were part of the IoT, and then they, like most magical organizations, they went through a period of schisming with each other, and they formed a new group called the Autonomatrix, which I joined with these folks in San Francisco. So that's how I originally got into it, and it appealed to me just because it had that, kind of even a postmodern approach to it. Let's deconstruct exactly what magic is and how it works, and then put it back together again in a way that takes away all of the unnecessary trappings and gets down to the core of the practice.
Because we're so near this particular season, I feel it's required of me to mention that part of the notoriety of your name, and it must be said that while you are a very friendly, sprightly fellow, and one that I do not fear at all, that in certain circles, if I drop the name of Joe Max, eyes would glaze open, sort of shaking would occur. And that part of this had to do with this particularly intense ritual that you wrote up and that was sort of widely distributed back in the day, of this such a weird time in the early 90s. It was computers and but it was the net, the web hadn't happened yet, and there was, rave music, and there was a kind of psychedelic revival, and chaos magic, and it was very strange. The aliens were in the air. It was a very weird time, and then part of what you wove into that was this Lilith ritual.
Yes.
And I just, if you could just give a little, and I read it the other day. I been meaning to do that for a couple of years, and I finally went and read it. And it was kind of cool because I just sat there and just sitting there reading it on the internet. I was like, I got that chill, that ooh.
You were touched by Lilith.
Indeed.
Well, if I've had any real influence on the greater culture, that has to be it. If you can go to, your listeners can go to the internet and put invocation of Lilith into a search engine and look at the first thing that pops up. You'll also find in excess of 10,000 hits. It has been copied, imitated, and exerted influence more times than I can count anymore. It came about back in it was the early 90s. It was 1994, and my wife now. We first started working Magic together, and we had met online in one of the early BBS computer systems. It's kind of like, yes, we had an online romance before there was an internet. But when the fledgling internet was just starting to happen, and in Usenet, the discussion boards like Alt Magic were where most of the computer savvy occultists were to be found in those days. So somebody had put out a call, a request for, could anybody write a good sexual magic ritual? And my wife and I, we had been experimenting with these things, and she was kind of a follower of Lilith, and she even took Lilith as her magical name. And so the two of us kind of like put together in a more formal way and wrote up the things the rituals and experiments that we had been doing. And posted it to alt.magic.sex.
So, here's one question I had was that I know that now, in the sort of neo-pagan community or set of communities, that there's of course, a very strong linkage between the figure of Lilith and, let's call it, dark sexuality or BDSM or, these kind of more intense dimension of erotic exploration. And was that already established at that time, or did you kind of help make that happen?
I think it was just barely being established. There was someone that I knew, a friend at the time. She was a professional dominatrix, and she was also a follower of Lilith, and she was the one who kind of got me piqued my interest in that particular goddess form. And so it was there, but it was not, I don't think it had reached the cultural meme point by that time. So this would have been like the 1992 or thereabouts.
Right.
So I think, I like to think I had something to do with making that relationship happen, drawing that parallel between it, because it wasn't that Lilith wasn't unknown. There's a magazine for Jewish women called Lilith, which I think had been published even before that.
Well, and I wonder, did you have any influence at all by Jack Parsons, of course, was the other obviously famous scientist who was kind of into all that, and he had written this essay, Woman Girt with Sword. Were you and your wife study any of that at all?
Oh, yeah. In fact, even before that, even during my skeptical period, I had become acquainted with some folks from the OTO. And the magical order that was it wasn't founded by, but was taken over by and expounded by Aleister Crowley, and with which the same organization that Jack Parsons belonged to. And now his conception of it was with the Thelemic god form of Babylon. And my wife and I both saw, a lot of parallels between Lilith and Babylon, and that they're almost aspects of the same, the same egregore, the same goddess form of feminine sexuality. So yeah, we were influenced by that somewhat, but Lilith is more. I mean, I guess she's become, she's kind of been sanitized, in the last decade or so. She's kind of the symbol of the uppity woman. There's a Lilith festival, and I sometimes find it amusing because having experienced kind of in a much more direct and experiential way the power of Lilith, that she's not very cuddly. She's not warm and fuzzy at all. So I find it amusing that there's somebody, like kind of a warm and fuzzy music festival has taken on her name. I'm sure she finds it very amusing.
So just because if people haven't encountered her before, just can you give the little capsule definition of where she comes from in terms of the Garden of Eden and that whole?
Oh, okay. Lilith is the mythological first wife of Adam, because if you look in the Bible, there are two descriptions in the Bible of the creation of human life. The first one says that God created, paraphrasing here, God created man and woman. Together he created them from the dust of the earth. Then in the next chapter, there is the story of Adam being cast into a deep sleep and a rib being taken from him, and from this was created Eve, the woman. Now, how do we explain this strange abnormality? I believe biblical scholars say, well, it's just two tellings of the same story, because the biblical writers often did that. They would explain something one way and then immediately tell the story in another form. So it's not considered to be a timeline. But still, we're looking at the first account of creation is that Lilith and Adam were created together, man and woman created together from the dust of the earth. So the only way to explain this is that there was another woman before Eve, and this was considered to be Lilith. Lilith considered herself an equal to man because they were both created together. Adam didn't like that idea. So they fought. And eventually Lilith cried out the unutterable name of God and rose up into the sky. And then she was cast down by God into the desert wastes, where she took up her residence and began mating with demons to produce the children of Lilith, the Lilam. And that's the official, Hebrew account of Lilith. They still, even to this day, there are talismans that in Semitic cultures that they hang over babies' cribs, because Lilith was considered the cause of sudden infant death syndrome.
Well, and she would, if I'm not mistaken, was also the cause of wet dreams, because she was the mother of all demons, and those demons were born because she was the original, succubus that would visit Adam when he was sleeping, cause him to have a wet dream, and then from his sperm that fell to the earth, all of the demons in the world were born.
Sure, she was the succubus who sat on your chest.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's one of the things. Lilith liked to be on top.
Yeah.
Adam didn't like that.
I don't know why.
Well, I don't want to switch gears too quickly from this marvelous invocational spot, but I just was looking at the clock, and I wanted to make sure that we have time to talk a little bit about your maker side, because one of the wonderful things about your work is that even if someone is a skeptic who goes, yeah, what are these radionics devices? What is all this kind of, occult energy stuff? Is that you make these very, very beautiful machines. I mean, both the Hieronymus machines that you've been building through plans that you got, through the glories of the internet, essentially, and also the kind of magical tools you bring in. That your whole approach to magic and practicing with these energies is a very kind of can-do, inventive kind of approach that's pretty, very strongly overlaps, this whole other kind of maker culture that also grew up in many ways in the Bay Area and California, and there's this sort of, even with a kind of steampunky edge or whatever, but there's really something about crafting objects that's very important to the way that you look at these things, and I just wanted to make sure I give you some time to talk about it.
Oh, sure. In fact, the premier journal for the maker, the DIY maker culture is Make Magazine, and they actually ran an article on building a Hieronymus machine once. You can even look that up. I believe you can even download the PDF. Make Magazine, search for Make Magazine and Hieronymus machine, and you'll find it. So there's a definite actual crossover between the making of radionics devices and the maker culture. I like to think if I was, lived 100 years ago, I'd be one of those guys in the like Jack Parsons in the laboratory in the back, mixing up strange chemicals and building weird electronic machines. Because I guess for me, the act of building something, be it any kind of any kind of device that's used for occult or esoteric purposes, it's a work of magic itself. Just the creation of it, because you're taking something from from your imagination and giving it material expression. So
and I always think it's hilarious when scientists kind of knock on imagination and kind of the pretend world that a lot of magicians seem to operate in, and they get down on the power of thought and imagination, because where do rocket ships come from except imaginary land, and then it's brought into physical existence. So that process of making the machine is the imitation of God making the world, out of thought, out of nothing, into physical substance.
That's exactly what you can even interpret this Kabbalistically. One of a friend of mine and one of my favorite authors, Lon Duquette, wrote a book called The Chicken Kabbalah. And if anyone who's interested in the Kabbalah should read this book. It's a hilarious read, but it also imparts a lot of really solid information. And it's a Kabbalistic interpretation of the four worlds. Where there is the absolute, which is the pure thought world, the four worlds traces the descent of thought into reality, because you start out in that highest realm. I think Lon used the example of a chair. So God said, "There shall be chair." Okay. All right, there shall be chair. The next step in that process is, what is chair? Well, chair is something you sit on, something to support a human sitting down. And, that is a definition that applies to everything from, a gorgeous, piece of Louis XVI furniture, or a couch that is mounted in the space shuttle, or a sawed-off stump. They're all chair. They all come from the same archetype. Then you descend down to the next world, and the Yetziric world, where it is, okay, well, what exactly is this chair? And that's where the imagination forms, where you draw up the plans. You make the mechanical drawings. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's exactly what it does and how it works and how it's put together. And then the final step down into material reality, or the world of Aseia, is we build the thing. We actually cut the wood or mold the metal or the plastic and make it into something that has a physical reality. And that becomes chair. So it is a magical process, and it always has been considered, like exactly what you're saying. It's a spiritual process that goes from there shall be this into making this.
For you, is there a difference between making the Hieronymus machine and crafting, magical tools for a Golden Dawn style ritual?
Well, I mean, not really. I mean, the process, the materials used and the process may be different, but the underlying idea, the concept, is still the same. It's an expression of magical reality into material reality. And, just making the thing, sometimes I feel like all I have to do is make it, and I have accomplished my work.
Right.
You see this a lot in chaos magic. Austin Spare boiled it down to sigil making, because you're taking something in your imagination and giving it with him it was a pen and ink drawing, and making it in a form of physical reality. And that is the work of magic itself. That's the most important thing that happens.
Well, another aspect of it that's maybe a little more concrete, but equally important is, because I'd seen your crafted objects, it's like, okay, this guy's one of those genius guys who's born, taking apart radios, and he's like, he studied industrial design or blah blah blah. I'm like, I just think of myself as someone who can't really make things very well. And then I was reading another interview with you. You're talking about how that a lot of that came later, partly out of your magical work. That part of your magical work was like, let's get better at making objects, and what lies in the far end of that is not just like a skill set, like an objective, well-trained skill set that enables you to deal with electronic devices. There's that, but there's also a kind of intuitive feel for what's going to work. What's the right tool? What's the right kind of wood? What's the right paint? And there's sort of a playfulness through that seemed to also be a way in which this kind of crafting or making has a magical, or at least, sort of visionary dimension to it.
Well, that's exactly what you were talking about. Is that I was dabbling. I was really dabbling because I was still such a newbie. Dabbling in Enochian magic, and one of the things that I conjured was a spirit to give me more artistic ability. Because I never really was that great of an artist, or that great, I was okay at mechanical drawing, but that was about it. And the stuff I tried to make before that didn't come out very well. So I said, well, I'm going to try using this magic to make this happen. And in the process, what happened to me, the result of this was just to gain, as you said, a kind of an intuitive feel, which I think an artist must have, of what's going to work, how is this going to come together. And often I have to, like if I'm working on a device or a magical tool, I'll have to leave it aside for a while because the time isn't right. Or I'm stuck on something, I can't seem to make this work properly. And then later on, oh, wait a minute, now it comes together, because it wasn't time for it yet.
Yeah, that's really great. So what are you working on right now?
Well, actually, sitting on my bench right now is another kind of radionics device. This one is actually, I'm trying to recreate an original one was by George de la Warre, who was a British radionicist. And in a country where radionics is still considered okay and nobody gets arrested for it, it's kind of treated like homeopathy in England. But I found there's a electronics museum in Minnesota that had actual photographs of the inside and the outside of this device. So I looked at the inside and go, I can make that. And I'm in the process of building it right now. Also, I'm working on a set of tools for my Golden Dawn Lodge. The other thing that's on my other bench where it's being painted is a ceremonial cup.
Beautiful.
Oh, and if anyone wants to see some of these radionics devices, you can visit my blog. Here, I'm going to give the plug now. Joseph Max, that's one word with one X, .wordpress.com. And you can see lots of photographs of the stuff that I make.
Well, Joe, that's great stuff. Thank you so much for being on Expanding Mind. It was a wonderful talk, and I do encourage people to go to the website to look at these devices and implements. It's really a wonderful way to get a sense of how these things work, is to just pay attention to the objects, because the objects have their own stories to tell, their own information, as Joe put it, to to impart. So I just want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank both of you for having me. I had a really great time.
Thanks, Joe.
Wonderful. All right,
welcome.
from Maja and me, keep your minds open.